The wind screamed like a living thing across Trail Hollow Station, ripping through the gaps in the boarded windows and clawing at Clara May Whitlock's coat as if it meant to tear her off the face of the earth. The station looked less like a building and more like something forgotten gray, leaning tired. Snow drove sideways across the clearing, and the sky hung low and bruised. The stagecoach that had carried her for 23 bone-shaking days was nothing but a disappearing blur of hooves and wheels, leaving her standing alone on frozen ground that didn't feel like America anymore. Her fingers burned and went numb at the same time. The cold here was different. It didn't bite. It burrowed. The door of the station swung open, a gust of firelight spilling onto the snow. A man stood in the doorway. Tall, broad-shouldered, fur-lined coat hair tied back, face carved by weather instead of time. Not handsome, not exactly, but striking, mountain-grown, stern, half-wild. His eyes were gray, the way ice could be gray right before it broke. "Elk," the station master muttered behind her, tipping his hat. There he is. So this was Elias Elk Harrow, the man who had sent for her, the man she had come across the continent to marry, the man who could end this cold. He stepped slowly onto the snow boots, crunching hat in hand, but not in greeting. His gaze never left her face. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just studied her like he was measuring something. She already knew she had failed. He held a single sheet of paper, the very paper she had sent him from Cheyenne. The letter she had forced herself to write because her conscience wouldn't let her travel all this way on a lie. She opened her mouth, but the cold and shame made every word die before birth. He didn't look angry. Anger would have been a mercy. He looked disappointed. "You came all this way," he said quietly, "and didn't think to tell me before this." He lifted the letter slightly. His voice stayed calm, and that was worse than shouting. "You wrote it when you were already on the road." She swallowed. "I was afraid." He let out a breath. Not quite a sigh. Not quite sorrow. "Afraid I wouldn't marry you if I knew the truth." He didn't ask. He stated it, as though fear was the only explanation for her crossing a continent in secrecy. And he would have been right. She felt something small inside her start to collapse. Elias, but she couldn't find the rest. He looked away, not at her, but out across the white, endless valley. When he looked back, his face had finished closing. "You're Barren, Clara May Whitlock." He didn't raise his voice, but every syllable landed like a strike to the chest. This marriage never stood a chance. She froze. Snow fell silent around them, like even the wind had paused to listen. She had heard those words before in hospitals' parlors, hushed family discussions, but never spoken like this. Not hard, not cruel, just final. He took the letter and tore it straight down the middle. Then again, then again. The sound of tearing paper was strangely loud in the frozen air. Clara felt something inside her rip along with it. He didn't throw the pieces at her feet. That might have meant something. He just let them fall. They landed in the snow like dying moths. "It's nearly dark," he said, eyes unreadable. "Stage won't be back until spring." She blinked. "Spring?" He nodded. Trail Hollow isn't a place you pass through in winter. It's a place you get stuck. He turned toward the station, leaving her alone in the snow. The world had tilted, and she had nothing to stand on. She didn't cry. Not yet. Inside the station, fire felt like stepping into another world. She held her hands out, and they stung painfully as warmth rushed back into her fingers. The walls were lined with old posters, pelts, cracked mugs, a rifle on every hook. Elk Elias stood across from her, with his back to the fire. He didn't sit, didn't offer her a chair. "You can't stay here," he said. "There's no boarding house, no doctor, no one to take you in." She finally looked at him, really looked. He was not a man accustomed to softness, not a man who wasted words, not a man who had planned for a future that was now gone. "I can leave in the morning," she whispered. He shook his head slowly. "Not in this weather. Roads to Boise are closed. Stage won't risk the mountain pass until April. Maybe May." Her breath caught. 5 months. Snowed in, alone. Not welcome. She spoke before she could stop herself. "What do you suggest I do?" He studied her like she was a problem in need of solving. "I have children," he said. 3 of them. They need a teacher." He paused. "You were a teacher, weren't you? Before all this?" She nodded slowly. "You can stay at my homestead. Teach them, work. I'll cover room and board. When spring comes, I'll take you to town and see you on the first coach east." His voice was not kind. It was practical. Just practical. "I won't be your wife," he said. "I know. You won't wear my family's name. I wouldn't ask to." His jaw clenched a moment. "This isn't charity. Just a bargain to get through the winter." She nodded numb. "I understand." He turned toward the door. "We leave before first light. You'll ride with the supplies." And he hesitated. Just slightly. "Dress warm. The mountains don't take kindly to weakness." She should have stayed silent. Should have bowed her head. Should have said thank you. Instead, she whispered, voice barely there, "Neither do I." For the first time since he'd stepped off that porch, Elias Harrow paused, not in movement, but in something deeper. His eyes found hers, and whatever flickered there was gone before she could name it. He nodded once, then stepped out into the cold. She was left with a torn future and a promise of shelter, not belonging, not home, not yet, but a beginning. Morning would bring the wagon ride through the Bitterroot Range. 3 children who did not want another ghost in their home, and the first spark of something she had long stopped believing in, a place where she might not have been wanted. But she might someday be needed. The sky had barely started to lighten when Elias rapped once on the station door and barked, "Let's go." Clara stood from the wooden bench where she'd barely slept, her limbs stiff, her eyes raw. She'd kept her boots on all night. The wool coat she wore, too thin for the Idaho winter, had barely kept her warm, even with the fire. Outside, the cold hit her like a slap. A mule-drawn wagon waited the back half loaded with barrels, flour sacks, a bag of oats, and chopped wood. Elias was already tying down the last of the canvas. He didn't look at her when he said, "Climb up back." She did, gripping the side rail with shaking hands, her carpet bag held close. The canvas flapped as she pulled it over her legs. Elias climbed into the front seat and gave the mule a quiet click of his tongue. The wagon creaked forward into a tunnel of trees and snow. They didn't speak for the first hour. The road, if it could be called that, was narrow and half-iced, winding up through pine forest and shadow. Snow dusted the tree limbs like ghosts watching from above. A creek trickled under thick ice to the left. Squirrels and fox tracks crossed the path. Clara kept her hands tucked under her thighs for warmth. Her toes ached. The further they climbed, the less she felt anything at all. Finally, Elias spoke. You used to teach girls back east, yes, she said. At Miss Everly's school in Virginia. Then at Rosewood Academy in Philadelphia. He grunted. What did you teach literature? Writing. Composition. She hesitated. But I can manage arithmetic. Another pause. The mule trudged steadily upward. They don't need a schoolmarm, he said. They need someone who can read stories and keep them quiet through storms. Willa already knows more than she lets on. Finn. He's good with numbers, bad with letters. Junie, she just wants someone to brush her hair. Clara looked down at her gloved hands. I can do that. He said nothing. She wasn't sure if that was approval or not. After 3 more bends, the trees gave way to a clearing. A cabin larger than she expected sat crouched in the snow, with 2 chimneys trailing smoke into the pale sky. Fences stretched out in 3 directions, part buried by white drifts. A barn leaned slightly to one side, its red paint faded and peeled. This is home, Elias said. He helped her down more out of duty than care, and then started unloading. Before Clara could step off the path, the front door of the house slammed open. 3 children spilled out all boots and shouting and winter coats too short in the sleeves. Papa, the oldest girl, cried. Did you bring peppermints? No, Elias said. And stop yelling. The girl, tall and bony with wind-bitten cheeks and eyes sharp as pine needles, narrowed her gaze on Clara immediately. Who's that? She's the teacher, Elias said. For winter. Willa's expression hardened. The lady from the letters, Junie, the youngest, peeked out from behind her siblings. Her cheeks were rosy, and she clutched a stuffed rabbit with one ear. She stepped forward cautiously. Is she gonna be our mama? The words froze the air. Elias's mouth tensed. No. She's not. Junie looked down. Oh. She's not the bride anymore, Willa said loudly. She's just the teacher. Clara felt that line pierce deeper than the cold ever could. She crouched, forcing a smile. I'm Clara May, and I'm very pleased to meet all of you. Willa didn't answer. Finn gave a half-hearted wave before turning away. Junie looked up again and whispered, Are you warm? The question startled her. A little. Good, Junie said, then grabbed her hand without warning. Elias led them all inside. The house smelled of wood-smoked tallow and something faintly sweet, maybe dried apples. The main room was open with a big hearth along one wall, a worn sofa near it, and a scarred wooden table in the center. A ladder led to the loft above. Clara's room was tucked off the kitchen's small spare with a cot, a basin, and a narrow window caked in frost. It was cold, but clean. She set her bag down. By mid-morning, she was at the table helping Junie with letters. Willa watched from a corner, arms folded, suspicious. Why'd you come all this way? Willa said suddenly. If you weren't even gonna be our mama. Clara looked up. I came because I thought I'd be part of something. But plans change. Willa's eyes narrowed. You gonna leave too, like Mama? Clara said softly. I'm here through the winter. Willa scoffed. That's not long. It's long enough to care. Willa didn't answer. She just walked out of the room. Clara found Finn coughing again after lunch, shallow, wheezy, like every breath was scraped from inside him. She knelt beside him, laid a hand on his back. His shoulders were too thin. Do you have chamomile? Or eucalyptus? Elias looked over from the doorway. Some. Why? There's a tea that helps, Clara said. And I can show you how to make a compress. He studied her. Then quietly. Do it. That night, after chores and supper, the house quieted. Clara helped Junie into bed. The girl clung to her a little longer than expected. "You feel warm now," she whispered. "So do you." Clara smiled, smoothing her hair. Outside the room, Elias stood at the fire, staring into the flames. She moved beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter. "They're good children," she said. He nodded. "She's smart," Clara added. "Willa, just guarded." "She's angry," Elias said. "Since Sarah died. Can't blame her." "No, but she's watching everything. She'll test you," he warned. "All of them will." Clara looked up at him. "So will you." He glanced down, eyes unreadable. "They're just children. They can't take another goodbye." "I didn't come here to play house, Mr. Harrow." He stiffened at the name. "Just Elias." "You're in my home now. Then stop calling me the teacher like I'm a hired broom." There was silence for a long moment. "You're not the bride anymore," he said quietly. "You're just the teacher." She nodded, accepting it. But something in the way he said it felt like a line drawn in frost. As she turned to leave, Junie's sleepy voice echoed from the loft, "Good night, Mama Clara." Elias looked sharply toward the sound. Clara didn't say a word. She just stepped into the cold hallway, her heart louder than her footsteps. The next morning would bring coughing that wouldn't stop. Finn's chest would tighten. Clara's promise to stay through winter would be tested faster than she imagined. The coughing started before dawn. Clara jolted upright in the narrow cot, her heart racing. For a moment, she wasn't sure what had woken her. Then she heard it again. Ragged, wet, too fast, too sharp. Finn. She grabbed her shawl, shoved her feet into her boots, and rushed down the hall. The fire in the hearth had died to coals, leaving the house cold and gray in the early light. From the loft above came the sound again, cough after cough after cough, brittle as dry wood snapping. She scrambled up the ladder. Finn sat hunched on the mattress, his tiny frame quaking. His face was flushed, his eyes glassy with fever. His chest heaved with each gasp. Willa sat beside him, eyes wide, hand on his back. Junie huddled in the corner with her rabbit, silent and pale. Clara dropped beside the boy. "Finn," she said gently, "can you hear me?" He nodded weakly, but the coughing didn't stop. It was relentless, like his body couldn't remember how to breathe. "Willa, get a blanket," Clara ordered. "Junie, fetch Elias." Neither girl moved. Now Willa shot off the bed, dragging a quilt from the corner. Junie bolted down the ladder, voice trembling, as she called for her father. Clara wrapped Finn tight and helped him lean forward, rubbing small circles across his back. His breaths were sharp, shallow. "We need steam," she muttered, "and heat." She carried him, blanket and all, down the ladder in her arms. He was light, far too light. Elias was already coming in from outside, boots thudding against the floorboards, hair still moot from snow. "What happened?" he barked. "He's burning up. His lungs are fighting him. He always gets worse in winter." Clara moved fast. "Do you have any dried herbs, chamomile, thyme, maybe eucalyptus?" He blinked. "I think so. Bring them. And a kettle. We need to boil water. Why, I'm going to build a steam tent." She cleared space near the hearth, dragging chairs, grabbing extra quilts. Elias set a kettle on the iron hook above the fire. Clara filled a basin with snow and tucked it near the flames to melt. Her fingers moved without thinking, ripping old sheets, soaking rags, layering fabric. Willa stood stiffly nearby, holding her brother's blanket like a shield. "Help me," Clara said. Willa's chin lifted. "Why should I trust you?" Clara didn't look up because he needs us more than you need to be right. The girl hesitated, then stepped forward. When the kettle whistled, Clara poured the water into a bowl with the herbs. The scent, earthy, sharp, soothing, rose immediately. She created a tent from chairs and blankets, pulling Finn beneath with her. The heat built quickly. "Breathe with me, sweetheart," she whispered, holding him close. In slow, now out. His lungs wheezed, but his body softened against hers. Outside the tent, Elias crouched low. "Is he? He's fighting," she murmured. "But he's not alone." For the next 2 hours, Clara didn't move. She rocked gently, spoke softly, and wiped the sweat from Finn's forehead. She told him stories in a quiet, steady voice. Not fairy tales, just memories. "How I used to walk barefoot through clover fields in spring," she said. "How my sister would sneak honey cakes under her skirts. How my father used to whistle Amazing Grace when he was nervous." Eventually, the coughing slowed. Finn's head dropped to her shoulder. Outside, the storm beat against the windows. But inside the tent, he was warm, breathing, alive. When she finally emerged, hair damp, eyes bleary. Elias was still there, arms crossed, jaw tight, face unreadable. "You kept him breathing," he said. "You earned your place." Clara didn't respond. She didn't have the energy to. She simply nodded once and leaned against the wall, dizzy with relief. Later, when Finn was resting and Junie had curled beside him, Willa approached Clara by the fire. She stared down at the steaming mug in Clara's hands. "You really helped him." "Yes. Even though we were awful." Clara took a sip, letting the warmth settle her voice. "You were scared. Fear makes people push away." "I thought you'd run," Willa admitted. "When he got bad. Or when Papa got cold again." Clara looked at her steady. "I don't run easy." Willa hesitated. "Is that how your own family treated you?" When they found out, the question hit too close. Too fast. Clara answered slowly. "They didn't throw me out. They just stopped seeing me." The silence between them was heavy but no longer hostile. That night, Clara sat by the fire long after everyone else had gone to bed. Elias came in from the barn, snow melting on his shoulders. He didn't speak at first, just watched the flames. Finally, he said, "Most women would have screamed, or fainted, or frozen." Clara didn't look up. "I was a teacher for 10 years. I've seen worse." He gave a small grunt. "You don't talk much about your life before this. There's not much worth repeating." Elias stood quietly. "Then I buried Sarah 2 winters ago. Willa found her, in the snow. Fever took her in less than a day." Clara closed her eyes. "I'm not asking for pity," he added. "Just don't expect the girl to give her heart away easy." "I don't expect anything," Clara said. "But I'll keep showing up." He nodded once. Just before turning in, she asked, "Do you think she heard me, Junie, when she called me Mama?" He paused in the doorway. "She says what she feels. Doesn't lie yet. Not like the rest of us." Clara didn't sleep much that night. She watched the fire die, then watched it grow again with morning. The next day, she would try to get the children back into routine. Letters, numbers, discipline. But something else was stirring. Willa, eyes sharper than ever, was already planning her next move. And Clara would soon find herself at the center of a challenge far greater than a sick child, a daughter's grief, a girl's distrust. a heart too scarred to believe in second chances. The snow had stopped, but the cold hadn't. Clara stepped out onto the porch with a bucket in hand, boots crunching softly on the fresh crust of white. Smoke curled from the chimney. From inside came the sounds of pans clinking, and Finn's soft laughter, still hoarse, but laughter nonetheless. She let herself smile. It had been 3 days since the worst of his spell. 3 days since Elias Harrow had looked at her like something more than a burden. 3 days since Junie had called her Mama Clara in front of everyone. The words hadn't been mentioned again. Not by Elias, not by the children, not even by Junie. But they echoed inside her like a promise she hadn't dared ask for. Clara filled the bucket at the well, then made her way around to the woodshed. As she reached for the handle, the door swung open and nearly smacked her in the face. Elias stood in the doorway, sleeves rolled, arms covered in sawdust. They both froze. "Sorry," he muttered. "It's all right," she said, stepping back. He handed her a split log. "Fire in the back room's gone out." She nodded, took it, and turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "She still talks about you." Clara turned back. "Who, Junie? Says your hands are warm. Says your voice makes the house feel soft." Clara lowered her eyes. "Children see what they want to see. She's not the only one seeing it." There was a pause so heavy it made her heart stutter. "She doesn't understand lines," he added. "Where one woman ends and another begins." Clara didn't flinch. "Do you?" His jaw tightened. "You didn't birth them, but maybe you're still meant to mother them." The words caught her completely off guard. She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. Instead, she turned back toward the house, her pulse louder than the wind. Inside, the children were gathered near the hearth. Willa sat cross-legged on the floor with a book in her lap, lips tight, as she read aloud to Finn and Junie. Clara paused in the doorway listening, and the bear said, "You're not lost. You're just finding your way home." Finn clapped. Junie giggled. Clara stepped into the room, set the log by the fire, and knelt beside Junie. "Would you like your hair braided today?" Junie nodded with wide eyes. "2 braids, or one too like Mama used to?" Clara's hand hesitated in the air. Willa's gaze snapped up from the book. "Don't." Clara turned slowly. "She doesn't need to forget," Willa said. "And you don't get to take her place." Clara met her eyes, calm but steady. "I'm not trying to take anything." Willa's voice rose. "Then stop acting like it." Junie's bottom lip trembled. Finn looked confused, caught in the crossfire. Elias appeared in the archway, silent but watching. Clara took a slow breath. "I offered to braid her hair. That's all." "You think that's what Mama was?" Willa snapped. A pair of hands and a quiet voice. "No," Clara said gently. "I think she was everything. And I think you're scared that remembering her hurts less than forgetting." Willa stood abruptly, the book dropping to the floor. "You don't know anything about us." Clara stood too. "Maybe not. But I'm here. I'm not pretending Sarah didn't exist. I'm not trying to erase her." "You never say her name," Willa spat. "Because every time I do, you flinch like it's a weapon." Willa turned and stormed out the front door, boots slamming the floorboards. Junie looked up confused. "Did I do something bad?" Clara knelt and wrapped an arm around her. "No, sweet girl, not a thing." Finn climbed into her lap without asking. Clara held them both close. Across the room, Elias exhaled and walked away. That afternoon, Clara found Willa in the barn, sitting on an overturned crate, tears frozen on her cheeks. Clara approached slowly. "Storm's coming again," she said softly. Willa didn't look at her. "I know." Clara sat beside her on the hay-strewn floor. "She died in a snowstorm, didn't she?" Clara asked. Willa wiped her face roughly. Fever took her fast. But she started coughing the night the roof caved in. Clara said nothing. Willa stared straight ahead. She always sang when storms came. Some old hymn. Junie doesn't remember it, but I do. I hear it sometimes when it's quiet. She pulled her knees up. "I miss her so much. I hate everyone else." Clara didn't try to correct her. "I braided Junie's hair that day," Willa whispered. "Mama was too sick. Junie thought it was a game. I didn't know it was the last thing I'd ever do that felt normal." Clara reached out and gently touched Willa's hand. "I'm not your mother," she said. "But I'm not your enemy either." Willa didn't pull away. They sat in silence until the wind began to howl through the eaves. That night, as the storm rolled in, Clara lit candles in the main room and set a kettle on to boil. Elias entered brushing snow from his coat. "I saw the barn light." "You out there?" "Yes." With Willa, Clara nodded. He looked into the fire. "She's still holding pieces she doesn't know how to put down. She's doing better than most would." He nodded. There was a pause before he asked, "Do you remember your mother?" Clara smiled faintly. "She made lemon pies with too much zest, hummed when she sewed. She smelled like lilac soap." "I remember Sarah the most in summer," he said. "She'd cut her skirts and ride horses like a boy." Clara imagined the woman wild and alive with sunlight in her hair. "She sounds like someone who didn't do things halfway." "She didn't," he said. Then quieter. "Which is why I don't want them getting halfway used to someone who won't stay." Clara looked at him. "You think I won't?" she asked. He didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. The next morning brought more snow, but also a visitor. A tall, broad-shouldered man with copper skin and calm eyes stepped into the clearing on horseback. Junie shouted from the window, "There's a stranger." Elias stepped onto the porch, Clara just behind. The man dismounted and grinned. "Well, if it ain't Elk Harrow hiding up here like a ghost." Elias stepped forward, surprised. "Isaac." The man laughed, pulling Elias into a brief hug. "Figured I'd bring you some roots and herbs before your boy coughs his lungs out." His eyes landed on Clara. "And you must be the woman folks are whispering about." Clara straightened. "That depends." "What are they saying?" Isaac smiled wide. "That elk found himself a ghost bride, and the ghost won't leave." Clara smiled back, fire flickering behind her eyes. The next chapter had arrived, and it wasn't backing down. The morning began with frost on the inside of the windows, and the fire burned down to nothing but orange coals. Clara was the first one awake. She lit a lamp, tugged her shawl tighter around her shoulders, and stepped into the kitchen to start the stove. The scent of pine smoke and brewing coffee filled the cabin by the time the others stirred. Junie came down the ladder first, rubbing her eyes and still clutching her rabbit. Finn followed slowly, coughing softly, but no longer gasping like he had days ago. Willa didn't come down right away. Clara didn't expect her to, not after yesterday. She glanced out the window. The sun was up but low, casting long blue shadows on the snow. Isaac was still here, having stayed overnight in the barn with his horse. Clara had heard him and Elias talking late into the night, low, steady voices thick with old friendship and a lifetime of things unsaid. Now Isaac stood outside chopping wood, his axe steady and precise. Elias sat at the table sipping coffee. He hadn't said much since Isaac arrived, and that silence lingered now. Junie bounced onto Clara's lap. "Are we doing school today?" "We are," Clara said. "As soon as everyone's fed and dressed." "Even Willa?" Junie asked. Clara hesitated. "If she wants." But Willa didn't want. She came down eventually, long after the others had finished breakfast, and sat at the far edge of the table with her arms folded. Clara passed her a slate and chalk anyway. Willa didn't touch them. "All we ever do is letters and stories," Willa muttered. "When do we learn something that matters?" Clara looked at her evenly. "Reading matters. Not out here. Papa didn't read books to fight bears or fix fences." "You don't need to fight a bear every day to survive," Clara said. "But you'll always need your mind." Willa smirked. "That what they told you in Philadelphia?" Clara's jaw tensed, but her voice stayed calm. "Yes. And it's true everywhere." Willa stared at her, unmoving. Then, without warning, she snatched the slate, stood, and walked out the front door. Finn blinked. Junie frowned. Elias rose from his chair, but Clara lifted a hand. "Let her go." She gathered herself and followed Willa into the snow. She found the girl behind the barn, sitting on a stump, digging her fingernail into the slate's edge. "I'm not your mother," Clara said gently. "But I'm not your enemy either." "You keep saying that," Willa muttered. "But you act like this is your house. I live here. I work here. I care for you and your siblings. That gives me a place. You're just a guest, just the teacher." Clara sat on the snow-packed ground across from her. "Maybe so, but I'm not pretending to be anything else." Willa looked down. "Junie calls you Mama." Clara nodded. "I didn't ask her to. She called Sarah that too. Every day." Clara studied her. "What would you prefer she call me?" "I don't care," Willa snapped. "I think you do," Clara said. "I think you care more than anyone knows." Willa looked up sharply. Her cheeks were red from the cold, her eyes burning. "I remember when Mama made snow cakes in a frying pan and called them Christmas cookies," she said suddenly. "I remember her singing when she brushed my hair. I remember her hands. I don't want to forget." "Then don't," Clara said. "Let me help you remember. You weren't there." "No. But I'm here now." Willa stood. "You didn't fight for this family. You just showed up." Clara rose too. "Sometimes staying is the fight." Willa didn't respond, but her hands trembled around the slate. Clara reached out, not to touch her, just to be steady. "Do you want to come inside?" Clara asked. Willa looked past her toward the house. "Only if you stop acting like you belong here." Clara's voice was quiet. "I never said I did." Willa walked past her without another word. Clara followed slowly. Inside, Isaac was at the table showing Finn how to whittle a piece of pine. Elias leaned against the doorway, arms folded. Clara stepped into the warmth and caught the way Elias's eyes flicked toward her, searching. "She's fine," Clara said. "Wasn't asking," Elias replied, but his shoulders eased. Isaac looked up and grinned. "So, how's the teacher faring in the wild?" Clara gave a tired smile. "Still here." Isaac raised a brow. "That counts for something." That afternoon, Willa rejoined the lesson without a word. Clara didn't mention it. Instead, she handed the girl a new story to read, one about a girl who built a raft to cross a flooded river in search of a missing brother. Willa read silently, then once more, then read it aloud to Junie by the fire. That night after supper, Elias stepped outside to tend the barn while Isaac smoked his pipe on the porch. Clara stood alone by the sink drying dishes. Willa appeared in the doorway, quiet. "Do you want to know what she smelled like?" Clara turned. "Who, my mama?" Clara nodded once. She smelled like soap, but not store soap, the kind you make, and her hands were always cold until she held your face. Clara's heart swelled. That sounds like something worth remembering. Willa bit her lip. "You braid hair wrong. You go too tight near the crown." Clara smiled. "Will you show me how to do it better?" Willa hesitated, then nodded. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something close. Outside, Isaac looked up as Elias joined him on the porch. "You always did pick stubborn women," Isaac said. Elias grunted. "She wasn't supposed to stay. But she is. For now." Isaac blew smoke into the cold air. "You keep waiting for her to leave. You'll miss her already being here." Elias didn't answer, but his silence spoke. Inside, Clara tucked Finn and Junie into bed. As she turned down the lamp, Junie whispered, "Is Willa mad at you?" "Sweetheart," Clara said. "Not mad, just healing." Junie nodded. "Mama used to say healing is like a splinter. Hurts more when it's coming out." Clara kissed her forehead. "Your mama was wise." Junie smiled. "You're wise too." Clara waited until the children slept, then returned to the fire where Elias sat sharpening a knife. He looked up as she entered. "She told me I braid too tight," Clara said. "She's not wrong." Clara sank into the chair across from him. "Do you think I'm still a stranger to them? I think you stopped being that when you stayed in the steam tent for 7 hours straight." Clara was quiet. "Then you think because I didn't birth them, I'm not allowed to care for them like I do." Elias's eyes met hers. "I think because you didn't birth them, the fact that you care means twice as much." The fire crackled between them. Clara's breath caught just slightly. Neither of them spoke again for a long while. The next day, Isaac rode out before sunrise, promising to return before Christmas with sweet tobacco and molasses if he could find it. But as he disappeared into the trees, Junie asked, "Are we going to do Christmas this year? Or is love still banned?" Elias stiffened, and Clara knew the next battle was coming. One with no maps, no rules, only memory, and the choice to make room for joy or keep running from it. The question hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. "Are we going to do Christmas this year?" Junie asked again, her little voice too careful, or is love still banned? No one answered right away. Elias had stopped mid-step near the door. Willa froze with a mug halfway to her lips. Finn blinked from the floor where he was playing with 2 whittled wooden animals. Clara set down the dish towel in her hands. The fire crackled loudly in the silence. Elias finally spoke, his voice low. "We don't need a tree to make it through winter." Junie frowned. "But it's not about the tree. It's about what comes with it," he replied. "Noise, mess, hope." "Since when is hope something po?" Willa snapped, surprising everyone, even herself. Elias turned, brow furrowed. "It's not bad. It's dangerous." Clara took a step forward. "Dangerous for who?" He didn't answer. He simply picked up his coat and stepped out into the snow. The door slammed hard behind him. Finn looked over, eyes wide. "Is it really banned, no?" Clara said softly. "It's just hiding." She looked at Junie, who seemed on the verge of tears. "We'll find it," Clara added, "even if we have to dig it out ourselves." That afternoon, she bundled the children in coats and scarves and led them out beyond the barn where the pine trees grew thick and heavy with snow. They didn't go far, just far enough to find a small symmetrical spruce tree near the ridge. Junie stood beside it, mittens pressed to her cheeks. "This one's just the right size." Clara smiled. "Then let's bring her home." Willa eyed the tree with narrowed eyes. "He won't like it." "He doesn't have to," Clara said. "But he'll live with it." They chopped it down together, Willa swinging the hatchet, Clara catching the trunk, and Finn directing as though he were a foreman of great importance. Junie twirled in the snow until she fell over, giggling. Back at the cabin, Clara cleared a space near the hearth and set the tree upright in an old milk can. They tied rocks around the base to hold it steady. It leaned a little, but it was perfect. There were no glass ornaments or gold ribbons, but Willa cut paper stars. Junie hung dried apple slices on strings. Finn threaded old buttons onto twine and wrapped it around the branches. By nightfall, the cabin looked warmer than it had in weeks. Elias came in late snow in his beard arms full of chopped wood. He stopped cold when he saw the tree. No one said a word. He looked at Clara, then at the children. His jaw worked as if chewing back something bitter. He dropped the firewood beside the hearth, shook the snow off his coat, and sat down without a word. Junie crept over to him with a star in hand. "Can you hang this one up high, Papa? I can't reach." He took the star slowly, eyes scanning the paper folds. Then, without speaking, he reached up and tucked it onto a top branch. Junie beamed. Later, after the children had gone to bed, Clara stood by the fire untying her apron. Elias remained seated, eyes on the flames. "You said hope is dangerous," she said softly. "But maybe you meant it's heavy." He glanced over. "It doesn't belong to people like us. People like us, people who bury too much. People who've learned not to expect the next sunrise." Clara stepped closer. "Then why keep going at all?" He rubbed his thumb across his palm, a nervous gesture she'd started to recognize. "Because of them. The little ones. They still believe." He nodded. "And I protect that belief by not feeding it empty promises." Clara sat across from him. "Hanging a star isn't a promise. It's a permission." He looked up. "To feel something again," she said. "Even if it's small." Elias said nothing for a long moment. Then, "What if the feeling doesn't stay?" Clara smiled, sad and knowing. "It never does. That's why we make room for it when it comes." He looked at her for a long time before nodding once. Not agreement, maybe, but understanding. The next morning, the cabin smelled of cinnamon and smoke. Clara had pulled together everything she could find, molasses oats, dried fruit, leftover flour, to make a kind of spiced bread. It wasn't fancy, but it filled the space with warmth and something that almost felt like memory. Willa helped without being asked. Junie tried to sneak raisins from the bowl when she thought no one was looking. Finn made a paper garland long enough to stretch across the mantel. Elias fixed the back fence quietly that afternoon. When he returned, he handed Clara a small package wrapped in brown paper. "I didn't have time to make something proper," he said gruffly. Clara opened it slowly, revealing a carved wooden brooch in the shape of a sprig of holly. "It's beautiful," she whispered. "I was aiming for passable. You missed." The tree glowed softly in the candlelight that night, and they all sat around it, passing cups of warm cider and listening to Junie hum off-key carols. For a moment, the cabin wasn't just surviving the cold. It was alive. After the children went to bed, Willa lingered by the fire. She turned to Clara, eyes softer than usual. You were right. About what hope doesn't make you weak. Clara tilted her head. What changed your mind? You did. Clara reached out, brushing a lock of hair from the girl's face. Someone had to go first, she said. And I'm not afraid to be the fool for love. Willa stared at her, expression unreadable. Mama used to say the same thing. Clara felt her heart twist. Then I take that as the highest praise. Willa nodded, then turned in for the night. Clara sat by the fire a little longer, watching the flames dance. Elias returned from checking the livestock snow clinging to his collar. He didn't sit. He didn't speak. He just looked at her, then at the tree. You said something yesterday, he finally murmured, about love not being the problem. She met his eyes. You were right, he said. It's not love that breaks us. It's what we do when it's gone. Clara nodded slowly. Then don't do nothing. He crossed the room and sat down beside her. For once, neither of them had to fill the silence. It was full already with possibility. But even in warmth, winter waits. The joy of that night wouldn't last forever. Just beyond the ridge, deep in the trees, a man watched the cabin light flicker. A man with papers in his pocket, and ownership on his mind. The knock came just after midday, sharp and impatient. Elias opened the door with a cautious hand on the handle, his body angled like a shield. Clara stood behind him, drying her hands on her apron, heart slowing with each step closer. On the porch stood a man who looked like he didn't belong to the land, his boots too clean, his wool coat too sharp at the shoulders. He wore a hat tipped just enough to be smug, and a thin mustache that curled with self-importance. Mr. Elias Harrow, he asked, though he already knew. Elias didn't nod. Depends who's asking. The man grinned sharp as a fox. Colton Hargrove, Land Registrar for Clearwater County. I'm here on official business. He pulled out a folded document from inside his coat, wrapped in twine, and sealed with a red stamp. Elias didn't reach for it. Clara stepped forward. What kind of business? Hargrove looked her over, not unkindly, but with the kind of gaze that said she'd already been sized up and dismissed. I wasn't aware you had hired help, Mr. Harrow. I'm not hired, Clara said flatly. She's family, Elias added, and that made Clara's heart thud loud enough to feel in her throat. Well then, Hargrove said with mock cheer, this might interest the whole family. He held out the document again. Elias took it slowly, eyes scanning the page. His jaw tightened the longer he read. What is it? Clara asked. He handed her the paper. It was a claim, legal stamped, signed, and registered with the county office just 10 days prior. The name listed under water rights reassignment read Colton Hargrove. You're trying to claim our stream, Clara said. Correction, Hargrove replied. According to county records, that stream was never properly recorded under your homestead. You've been using it, yes, but squatting on a resource isn't the same as owning it. Elias stepped forward. That stream runs straight through this land. And if you'd filed the paperwork properly in 1876, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Hargrove tipped his hat. As it stands, I've acquired rights to it fair and square. So unless you plan to take me to court? We don't have time for court, Clara cut in. We've got children to feed. That water is how the livestock drinks, how we cook, clean, survive. Hargrove gave a wide, empty smile. Then I suggest you find another stream. And with that, he turned, walked down the path, and mounted his horse. Elias didn't move as he watched the man ride off into the trees. Clara clutched the papers, the red seal bleeding against her palm. Inside, Junie's voice called, "Is it bad news?" Clara turned slowly. Not yet. But it would be. That night, Elias sat at the table staring at the document like it might catch fire if he glared hard enough. "He's not bluffing," he muttered. "He's found some loophole, and he's got the law to back it up." Clara stood at the stove, her shoulders tight. "Then we find our own loophole." He looked up. "You think I haven't? I've lived on this land since I was 16. I helped dig that creek by hand when the spring overflowed. You think some boot-polished paper pusher gets to take that away?" "Yes," Clara said bluntly. "Unless we outsmart him." Elias let out a bitter laugh. "You think reading and writing are going to change a land grant?" "I think understanding what he wants might." He paused. "What do you mean he's not after the water?" "He's after the land." Elias frowned. "It's too remote. There's nothing here worth building." "There's water," she said, "and the land below the ridge. That's flat. Good for rail lines. Maybe even logging. He's buying future profit." Elias exhaled. "Damn vultures." Willa stepped in, then arms folded, eyes wary. "What do we do?" Clara looked at her, then back at Elias. "We fight, not with guns. With what we've got, words, signatures, neighbors. Evidence." Elias leaned back in his chair. "We've got no money for lawyers." "We don't need lawyers," Clara said. "We need records, witnesses. Anything that shows the stream existed as part of this homestead before Hargrove's claim." Elias thought for a moment, then stood. "I have something," he said. He disappeared into the back room. When he returned, he held a worn leather ledger, its corners cracked, pages yellowed. He opened to the front. Clara leaned in. It was a journal, not Elias's. Sarah kept everything he said. Every log of planting, harvest, rainfall, water levels, even a sketch of the creek. He pointed to an entry dated 15 years back. "See this March 22nd. Creek swelled and split fence near the calf pen. Spent all morning with elk rerouting the bank." "That's proof." Clara looked up at him. "That's more than proof. That's a map to save this land." He nodded slowly, voice quiet. "Sarah might just win this fight after all." Willa stepped closer. "What can I do?" Clara handed her the journal. "Start copying anything that mentions the stream. Dates, names, descriptions." Willa took it with reverence. "I'll ride into town tomorrow," Elias said. "See if old Thomas at the courthouse still owes me a favor." Clara looked at him steady. "Go fast. He won't wait long." That night, the fire burned high. Clara sat at the table with Willa copying journal entries onto fresh paper. Finn slept with his head in Junie's lap as she hummed a lullaby. Outside, the wind picked up, but no one felt it. The cabin was too full of purpose. As the clock neared midnight, Willa looked up. "You think we'll win?" Clara didn't answer right away. Then she said, "Justice doesn't always show up on time. But sometimes if you shout loud enough, it hears you anyway." The next morning, Elias saddled the horse before sunrise. Clara handed him the copied pages, bound and neat. "Don't let him talk you in circles." "I won't," he said. He paused, hand on the reins. "If this doesn't work..." Clara met his eyes. "Then we find another way." He nodded, then rode off into the gray light. By sundown, he hadn't returned. By moonrise, Junie stood at the window staring out like she could will him home. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Colton Hargrove sat in a room with men who only cared about landlines and dollar signs. The fight had begun. But the war for home was just getting started. Snow fell in thick, heavy flakes the next morning, quieting the world under its weight. The wind had died, leaving behind a stillness too sharp to feel peaceful. Elias hadn't come back. Clara stood on the porch, wrapped in her wool shawl boots, buried in powder eyes fixed on the tree line like she could summon him through sheer will. The horse hadn't returned either, which meant he hadn't been thrown or forced to walk back. But it also meant he was still out there, delayed, perhaps cornered, and they were out of time. Inside, Willa was at the table rereading the copied pages of Sarah's journal, as if she could find something new. Finn was sick again, not as bad as before, but warm to the touch, coughing in short bursts from the loft. Junie had taken to sleeping with her boots on, like she expected someone to wake her in the night and tell her to run. Clara came in and shut the door softly. The tree they had cut still stood drying at the base, but stubbornly green. The garland had slipped slightly, and Clara righted it before speaking. "He'll come back," Willa said, not looking up. Clara nodded, though it felt more like a prayer than agreement. "He will." She moved toward the table. "But if he doesn't come back with help, we need to be ready." "Ready how?" Willa asked. "To fight back," Clara said, "with everything we've got." The door creaked. Junie poked her head out from the back room. "Will Papa have to shoot somebody?" Clara knelt and pulled the little girl into her arms. "No, baby. We're going to fight with paper and truth." Junie made a face. "That doesn't sound very strong." Clara smiled faintly. "You'd be surprised." Later that day, Clara rode out toward town herself, taking the second horse and the bundle of documents they'd prepared. It was a 6-mile ride through snow and shadow, and her breath came in clouds that felt too thin. But she rode hard, focused on the courthouse, on the face of the one man Elias said might listen. Thomas Ketchum, retired judge-turned-part-time clerk, who owed Elias a favor older than some of the trees on Harrowland. Clara reached Clearwater by dusk. The town was quiet. A few shop windows glowed gold with lantern light, but the streets were empty, the air heavy with the kind of hush that comes before change. She tied her horse outside the clerk's office and stepped into the warmth. Thomas Ketchum looked up from behind a stack of ledgers. His hair was thinner than Elias described, but his eyes were sharp. "You're not Elk," he said. "No," Clara replied. "I'm the woman who came to help him hold on to his land." He set down his pen. "You got something worth my time." She laid the pages on his desk without a word. He started to read, flipping pages, pausing at Sarah's sketches, shows, and rainfall logs, his lips pressed thin. Clara stood still, arms crossed over her chest, resisting the urge to fidget. When he finally looked up, his eyes were darker than before. "Do you know what Hargrove's doing? I know he's using legal tricks to take a home from 3 children who already lost their mother." Thomas nodded slowly. "He's filed 5 claims like this in the last 3 months, picking off the edges of properties where boundaries were never formally recorded, taking advantage of winter and silence." "Well," Clara said, "we're not silent anymore." He gave a small, dry chuckle. "You married to Elk." Clara hesitated. "No." "Then why are you standing here with your jaw set like it's your name on the deed?" She lifted her chin. "Because you don't have to be blood to belong to a family. You just have to stay when it gets hard." He studied her a long moment. Then he stood, pulled a fresh sheet of parchment from his drawer, and began to write. Back at the cabin, the wind had returned. Willa tried to stay busy, but every sound from the woods made her flinch. She kept glancing at the window eyes, searching for a lantern's glow. Finn coughed in his sleep. Junie lay beside him, whispering something into his ear, like she could keep his fever down with hope alone. Willa walked to the hearth, poked at the fire, and murmured, "She should be back by now." Junie looked up. "Maybe she's stuck in the snow." "She's not stuck," Willa said. "She's stubborn." Junie smiled faintly. "Like you worse." There was silence for a moment. Then faint but real came the sound of hooves. Willa rushed to the door and flung it open. Clara rode into the clearing, her scarf half frozen to her face, eyes red from wind and exhaustion. She carried a satchel strapped to her saddle. Behind her, another rider followed Thomas Ketchum, bundled tight in a wool coat, his badge glinting at his chest. Clara dismounted stiffly and handed Willa the satchel. "We have a notarized affidavit, a certified land use history, and a motion to contest the claim." Willa blinked. "What? We're taking Hargrove to court." Thomas tipped his hat. "And I'll make damn sure he answers for every acre he's tried to steal." Clara stepped inside, barely out of the cold, before she asked. Elias. Willa shook her head. "Not back yet." Clara looked at Thomas, who read the question on her face. "I passed him on the ridge," he said. "He was heading for Judge Lamson's place. Probably stayed the night." Clara exhaled. "Good." That night, Clara didn't sleep. She sat by the fire with the papers spread across the table, marking spots. Notes, lines she'd have to memorize. Willa brought her tea and sat beside her. "Are we really going to court?" "We are. In town, like, with benches and lawyers," Clara nodded. Willa was quiet for a long time. "Then I want to speak." Clara looked at her surprised. "What, when they ask about the land, I want to tell them what it means. I want them to hear from someone who's lived here." Clara swallowed hard. "You don't have to, Willa. You've done enough." "No," the girl said, voice steel. "This is my home. I get to defend it." Clara reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You'll do just fine," she said. "Just speak from your heart. Even if it's messy. Especially if it is." Outside, the snow kept falling, but inside the fire was strong. They had papers. They had names. They had each other. And as Clara closed her eyes for a few precious minutes of sleep, she heard the wind whisper something true. They underestimated the wrong family. In 2 days they would ride into Clearwater again, not to plead, not to beg, but to fight. Because home isn't where you're born. It's where you plant your feet and say, "No more running." They rode into Clearwater on the coldest morning of the year. The sky was a flat, unbroken gray, and the trees groaned under the weight of new snow. Clara's hands were stiff in her gloves, but her grip on the reins never loosened. Beside her, Willa rode with her back straight, jaw set, eyes sharp. She looked older than her years, that morning hardened, not by time but by choice. Elias had returned just before dawn, his coat iced over and his horse nearly lame. He hadn't said much when Clara threw her arms around him, just held her for a long moment, before nodding toward the saddlebag on his horse. "I got Lamson to sign," he'd said. "He'll back the petition if Ketchum files it." Now they were all here, Elias, Clara, Willa, and Thomas Ketchum, riding into the heart of town like they were stepping into enemy ground. And in a way they were. The courthouse sat on the far end of Main Street, an old stone building with a clock tower that hadn't worked in years. Hargrove's buckboard wagon was already parked out front, his black gelding tied neat and smug. Inside, the courtroom smelled of stale heat and pine dust. A few locals had trickled in out of curiosity. Most stayed quiet, though Clara recognized the postmaster and the widow who ran the mercantile. Small-town eyes didn't miss much, and word of Hargrove's land grabs had clearly begun to spread. The judge, Lamson, sat at the bench, thick glasses perched low on his nose, his white hair combed flat, like he'd licked his palm before court. His voice, though gravelly, carried across the wooden walls. "We'll begin with the petitioner's statement," he said. Thomas stepped forward. "Your Honor, we contest Colton Hargrove's water rights claim on the Harrow property. We present a documented history of stream use dating back over 15 years, including journal entries, rainfall logs, and a sketch map, all in the hand of the late Sarah Harrow, whose homestead rights passed to her husband, Elias Harrow, upon her death." Hargrove stood too polished in his navy coat, hands folded like a preacher's. "Your Honor, I don't dispute their sentiment. But sentiment is not ownership. The Homestead Act required proper documentation. The Harrows failed to file a water easement when the opportunity was provided. I did. That stream is mine by law." "It was never yours by right," Elias said, stepping forward, voice like low thunder. The judge banged his gavel. "One at a time." Clara looked at Willa. "You ready?" The girl nodded, then stood and walked slowly to the front. Her hands trembled, but her voice was steady. "My name is Willa Harrow. I've lived on that land since I was 5. My mother kept a journal because she believed in remembering things that mattered. She wrote about that stream every spring when it flooded, and every summer when we hauled water from it to boil for laundry." She looked straight at Hargrove. "That water raised us. It isn't a number on a page. It's part of our life." Hargrove smiled thinly. "A compelling story. But I don't see how a child's memories can override a legal filing." "You're right," Clara said, rising from her seat. "Which is why we brought more than memories." She handed a set of copied entries to the clerk, along with Sarah's original map, still smudged with ash, from where it had once hung near the hearth. Ketchum stood. "Your Honor, the document predates Mr. Hargrove's filing by over a decade. The Harrow family may not have filed an easement, but they have a provable pattern of use that establishes common law precedent." The judge reviewed the documents in silence. When he finally spoke, his tone had cooled. "Mr. Hargrove, you submitted this claim 10 days before the first snow. You've since filed 5 others. You expect the court to believe this is coincidental." "I expect the court to follow the law," Hargrove said. Lamson leaned forward. "You expect the law to work like a hammer, but sometimes it's a door, and sometimes, Mr. Hargrove, it's a mirror." He looked at the papers again, then at Elias. "This land has been your home for nearly 2 decades." "Yes, sir." Lamson turned back to Hargrove. "You may have found a loophole, but what you did with it speaks louder than ink. I'm siding with the Harrow family. Your claim is denied." The gavel cracked once hard. For a second, no one moved. Then Junie, who had been waiting with Isaac outside, came running through the courthouse doors, with Finn at her side, shouting. "Did we win?" Clara knelt just in time to catch them both, tears stinging her eyes as she laughed. "Yes, we did." Willa turned her shoulders, finally sagging with relief. Elias placed a hand on her back, grounding her like an anchor. Hargrove stormed out, boots echoing against the floor. No one stopped him. Outside, the sun had finally broken through the clouds, casting long rays across the snow-covered roofs. People began to talk in hushed tones, nodding respectfully as the Harrows stepped out into the street. Elias turned to Clara. "You fought like you were born on that land." She looked at him. "Maybe I wasn't born there, but it made me." He took her hand. "I've known a lot of strong women, but none who stayed through a winter like this." She smiled. "Well, you didn't exactly make it easy." He chuckled. "No, I didn't." They all returned home that afternoon. The ride felt lighter. The world felt wider. The creek shimmered in the sunlight as they crossed it, familiar and untouched. Later by the fire, Clara watched Willa hang Sarah's journal back in its spot near the mantel. She'd added her own ribbon to mark the pages they'd used. Her handwriting had joined her mother's. When Junie curled up next to Clara that night, she whispered, "Now can we have Christmas for real?" Clara kissed her forehead. "Yes, honey. Now we can." But peace never lingers too long on land worth fighting for. In the shadows beyond the creek, another man was watching. A man with a different kind of power, one that didn't need courtrooms or signatures. He didn't want the stream. He wanted the land for blood, for revenge. And he wasn't afraid to wait. The first sign came as a smear of blood on fresh snow. Clara spotted it at the edge of the north fence line, just a streak, at first half hidden under a branch. But then she saw the drag marks, the way the snow had been disturbed, like something large had been pulled off the path and into the brush. She crouched low, eyes sweeping the trees, ears tuned to every gust of wind. The woods were too quiet. She stood slowly, hand resting on the small revolver Elias had insisted she carry when he wasn't home. It had felt heavy at first. Now it just felt necessary. Back at the cabin, Elias and Isaac were repairing the chicken coop after a storm-bent tree cracked part of the roof. Clara waved them over with urgency in her steps. "There's blood," she said. "And tracks." Elias looked up fast. "Where north fence?" "Near the old trap line." Isaac exchanged a glance with Elias. "Could be a wolf, maybe a wounded deer." Clara shook her head. "No broken prints. No animal stammer. It looked human." Elias was already moving toward the barn. "Get the rifle." By the time they reached the spot, the trail had half frozen, the blood dark and rusted. Isaac followed it quietly, rifle in hand, while Elias covered the rear. Clara stayed back, scanning the trees for movement. They found him slumped against a pine trunk, breath-shallow shirt soaked with blood. His face was bruised, one eye nearly swollen shut. He'd been beaten badly and left for dead. Elias dropped to his knees. Elk. It was Rainwalker, Elk's cousin, the tracker from the West Range. Half Blackfoot, half fire, all pride. Clara had met him once briefly when he came to trade salt pork for medicine. He'd been quiet, measured, but not the kind of man to fall easy. Now he coughed blood onto the snow and rasped, "They're coming." Elias leaned closer. Who Rainwalker struggled to speak, Hargrove, was just the first. Someone else sent him. Man in a gray coat, didn't care about the land. Wanted names. "Wanted," he gasped. "You." Isaac cursed under his breath. He was hunting. Clara felt cold ripple through her spine. Why would someone come after Elias Rainwalker's eyes flickered to her? Not just him. He pointed weakly toward the cabin. Her. They carried him home on a makeshift sled, bundled in elk skins and linen. Clara moved fast, boiling water, stripping his shirt, packing herbs and stitching wounds. She worked in silence, her hands firm even as her chest twisted with fear. Junie and Finn were kept upstairs. Willa helped quietly, fetching towels and clean cloth without being asked. Elias stood by the door, eyes scanning the tree line, jaw clenched so tight, Clara feared it might snap. When Rainwalker finally slept, his breath ragged, but even Clara stepped outside with Elias. "You knew someone would come," she said. He didn't deny it. "I thought we had time," he murmured. "We don't." She looked out across the field, where the snow glowed silver in the rising moonlight. "We need to know who he is. This man in the gray coat. Why he's after you. Or me." Elias nodded slowly, then finally said the words he'd been holding back for weeks. His name is Ward Decker. Clara froze. Decker, he used to run freight for the army, got rich buying rail land during the war. But he did darker things too. Worked both sides during the Dakota conflict. Blackmail, coercion, land theft. He was the man behind the massacre at Twin Bluffs. Clara swallowed hard. I've heard of it. Everyone has. Elias's face was stone. He was after my family then. Killed Elk's father. Took lands from Blackfoot kin and anyone who stood in his way. Why now? Because he found out we lived. Clara stared at him. And me? What does he want with me? Elias hesitated. Then maybe it's not you. Maybe it's what you've built. A story of resistance. A woman standing with a landless family. That's dangerous. People talk. Clara exhaled sharply, nerves buzzing. If he's watching us, we have no time. Elias looked back toward the cabin. We have to disappear. No, Clara said. That's what he wants. Fear. Silence. We just won the first battle. If we run now, we lose everything. So we wait, he asked. Let him come, no, she said again. We prepare. That night the cabin turned into a fortress. Elias and Isaac set traps along the perimeter. Willa helped Clara inventory every jar of food, every rifle round. They boiled snow for water, boarded the windows tight, and kept the fire low. Clara tucked Junie and Finn in close together and whispered stories that ended in courage. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Willa lingered at the table, tracing her finger along the edge. Do you think he'll come tonight? She asked. No, Clara said. He'll wait for us to sleep easy. So what do we do? Clara met her eyes. We let him think we're still scared, she said. But when he steps on our land, we make him remember why we stayed. That night, the quote burned itself into Willa's mind like a brand. When he steps on our land, we make him remember why we stayed. The moon climbed high. Snow drifted across the porch. And in the deep dark between the trees, boot prints began to form. A man in a gray coat had arrived. But he wasn't alone. The first shot split the night open. Clara bolted upright in the loft, heart hammering so loud she couldn't hear anything else for a beat. Then came the second report, closer this time, followed by the crack of splintered wood. Downstairs, she whispered to Willa, who was already out of bed, grabbing Junie and Finn from under the quilts. The children didn't scream. They'd been warned. They moved like shadows, barefoot and fast. Clara grabbed the rifle propped against the wall. Elias was already at the front door, crouched low, pistol drawn, his breath sharp and visible in the lantern light. They're here, he said. How many? 3, maybe 4. One in a gray coat. Clara's blood iced. Decker. Elias nodded once. Another bullet struck the porch beam, sending a spray of wood shards into the floor. They're trying to scare us out, Elias growled. Force us into the open. Let them try, Clara said. We've got cover. We've got reason. He glanced back at her, something fierce in his eyes. You don't have to stay up here. She loaded the rifle with a calm she didn't feel. I already did. The cabin wasn't a fortress, but it was built tight. Small windows. One entry. Solid logs. Willa helped usher the children into the root cellar beneath the pantry, kissing Junie's head and whispering something about bravery and quiet. Clara placed a lantern near the opening, just enough to keep them from being swallowed by full dark. Isaac took the rear door. He had an old repeater and a clear line of sight down the back ridge. Rainwalker, bruised but upright, moved like a ghost through the shadows, a hunting knife in one hand, a borrowed Colt in the other. They didn't speak strategy. They didn't need to. They just waited. Clara crouched near the window, breathing through the cold, her cheek pressed to the butt of the rifle. A shadow moved in the trees, tall, slow, deliberate. She didn't fire. Not yet. Another step, closer. She saw the glint of something metal on fabric. The collar of a gray wool coat. Decker. She didn't fire at his chest. She shot the lantern beside him. The explosion of flame startled his men, lighting up the night with a sudden brief roar. A scream followed someone hit by glass or fire. And then Isaac opened up from the back, raining bullets into the woods with measured control. Elias stepped onto the porch, crouched behind the barrel planter, and fired 3 times into the trees. 2 of the men bolted. Clara took aim again. Not to kill, to corral. Heard them like wolves back toward the stream bed where the snow was shallow, and their steps would betray them. Rainwalker moved in silence, flanking Decker as he scrambled back into the shadows, pistol in hand, eyes wild. "You still think this is yours?" Elias shouted. "You come to our land thinking we'd kneel," a shot rang out from Decker's direction, striking the porch rail, inches from Elias's face. Still standing, Elias growled, ducking back. Clara slid down beside him. "He won't stop unless we make him. He's not here for the water anymore," Elias said. "He's here to break something." Clara's eyes burned. "Then let's give him nothing to shatter." They moved together. Elias from the front. Clara from the side, circling like predators around the last heartbeat of danger. Decker was smart. He didn't run. He crouched low behind a fallen log gun still raised, waiting for one of them to expose too much. He never saw Willa coming. She emerged from the tree line behind him, silent knife in hand. He turned too late. She didn't stab, she hit him in the back of the head with the butt of the knife, knocking him forward into the snow. He scrambled, dazed, gun slipping from his hand. Elias was on him in 2 strides, boot to his wrist pistol aimed at Decker's forehead. "Go on," Decker hissed. "You think this ends with me?" "No," Elias said. "But it ends with you here." Decker spat blood into the snow. "You don't have the stomach to kill a man like me." Elias's finger twitched. Clara stepped between them. "He's not going to kill you," she said, "because that's what you want. Chaos, retaliation, proof we're just animals in your eyes." Decker sneered. Clara turned to Willa. "Get the rope." They tied him and dragged him back to the clearing. Rainwalker lit a torch and held it close enough for the man to sweat. "You trespassed," he said. "You tried to take our land," Willa added, voice steady. "You brought violence." Clara stood tall. "And now, Mr. Decker, you're going to face the law. The real law, not the one you bought." Decker laughed even as blood trickled from his lip. "You really think a judge out here's gonna care what a squatter girl and a half-blood tracker have to say?" Clara leaned in, eyes sharp as nails. "I think they'll care what a federal land agent finds when we hand you over with a signed confession and witnesses from 3 townships." He blinked. "What, you thought we didn't do our homework?" she said. "You left a trail. Bribery, forged deeds, intimidation. You weren't just careless. You were arrogant." Elias threw a leather-bound packet onto the snow beside him. "Your men left more than tracks. They left paper, names, a whole history you thought nobody'd bother reading." Decker's face drained of color. They kept him tied to the post out front until morning. Elias took the first watch, Rainwalker the second. Clara didn't sleep. At dawn, they loaded Decker into the wagon and rode toward Clearwater. Junie sat in Clara's lap, arms around her neck. "Is he the bad man?" she whispered. Clara nodded. "He was." "Is he going to go away?" "Yes." Forever, Clara looked out at the trees passing by. "I don't know, baby, but he won't come back here." Junie looked up. "Because we fought, because we stayed," Clara said, kissing her forehead. "Because we showed him what family looks like when it refuses to be broken." And as the sun rose over the valley, warming the ice from the trees, Clara knew the final battle was close. But so was peace, and they were ready to meet both. The snow had mostly melted by the time the trial ended. The courthouse in Clearwater stood quieter than it had during the first hearing. Fewer people filled the benches this time, but those who came leaned forward, eyes alert, as Ward Decker was read his verdict guilty of conspiracy to defraud unlawful land seizure and coercion under federal homestead protections. Judge Lamson spoke without flair or ceremony. "You built an empire on fear, Mr. Decker, but the land remembers what men forget. And the people, especially those who stay, don't scare so easy. They sentenced him to 15 years in federal custody. It wouldn't bring back the blood spilled over stolen homesteads. Wouldn't undo the threats, the bribes, the coldness of the nights that Clara and Elias and the children had endured. But it meant something. It meant the law, when wielded with honesty and grit, could still hold its shape in a world too used to bending." Outside, the wind had softened. Spring hadn't come, not officially, but the thaw was in the air, the kind that whispered of change before the buds ever dared show. Willa stood beside Clara, holding Junie's hand, both of them watching the wagon roll Decker out of town under martial escort. "He looked small," Willa said quietly. Clara nodded. "That's what happens when men build their power on shadows. Light shrinks them." They stayed in town another day, mostly at Ketchum's suggestion. The children were treated to pastries from the bakery, a luxury that left Finn sticky and laughing. Rainwalker found supplies to bring back to the cabin and made quiet arrangements with Isaac for rotating watch on the ridge. The family had been bloodied, but not broken, and they were not alone anymore. That night, Elias found Clara standing by the window of their room at the inn, arms folded, watching the lanterns flicker along the street. "You should sleep," he said, voice low. "I will," she answered. "I just wanted to see it one more time. This town, the way it looks when you know it listened." Elias stepped closer. "You made them listen." "No," she said, shaking her head. "We did. All of us. Willa, Rainwalker, Isaac, you, even Sarah in a way. She left the truth behind. We just decided not to bury it." Elias brushed a piece of hair from her cheek. "You still thinking of leaving after spring?" She looked at him carefully. "You still afraid I will?" He didn't answer. Clara turned toward him fully. "Elias, I never belonged anywhere before. But that land, your children, this family, we built something real. I don't need to go, I just needed to be wanted without being needed." His voice cracked slightly. "I want you here." She smiled finally and stepped into his arms. "Then I'll stay." They returned to the homestead 2 days later. The children ran ahead, bursting into the open with wild cries, arms stretched wide like they were home from war. Clara walked the fence line with Willa that evening. The snow was melting fast now, revealing patches of earth beneath the kind that could grow things again. "You still planning on keeping Sarah's journal by the hearth?" Clara asked. Willa nodded. "I've started adding my own pages. I think Mama would have wanted that." "She would," Clara said. "She gave this land life. But you're giving it future. They sat on the porch that night, the whole family together. Junie braided scraps of yarn for the new lamb they'd found near the tree line. Finn fell asleep in Clara's lap, breathing steady. Rainwalker said little, only nodded as he left for the West Ridge, but not before handing Elias a carved wooden token shaped like a bear, in case another wolf ever shows. The stars came out brighter than they had in weeks, unobscured by storm or smoke. Elias passed Clara a cup of tea and said, "You still believe in signs. I believe in choices," she answered. "But sometimes I think the land does speak. You just have to know how to listen." They were quiet for a while. Then Elias said, "I buried Sarah's locket out back, beneath the cottonwood." Clara looked at him surprised. "She told me once," he continued, "that if she ever had to leave, she wanted to become part of the roots, something still growing. I think maybe that's what we all want." Clara leaned her head against his shoulder. "We all want to belong," she said. The wind rustled the bare branches above, no longer menacing, just present. Alive. Weeks passed. The snow fully receded. Saplings pushed up through thawed soil. The cabin stood firm. So did the family. Letters came. From other homesteaders. From townspeople. From the courthouse itself. Some were simple thanks. Others were requests for guidance, for stories, for advice on how to fight land thieves without losing their souls. Clara answered each one. She began keeping a new journal, one not just for the Harrow family, but for all those who had stayed behind in the silence and made something strong out of it. On the first page she wrote, "The land belongs not to the loudest nor the richest, but to those who love it enough to stay." That spring, Willa helped plant the garden with Junie and Finn. That summer, Clara married Elias beneath the cottonwood tree, Sarah's locket hanging quietly from one of the low branches, swaying in approval. And in the years to come, when new voices asked, "Who built this place?" the answer was always the same. Not one, not blood, not law, but heart. And the kind of love that knows when to fight and when to stay. Because the land doesn't ask you to be perfect. It only asks that you belong to it fully. And they did.